Hi, everyone. I'm JD Talasik from the Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences, and I'm joined with my colleague, the wonderful Alana Quinn. How are you doing, Alana?
I'm doing well, JD. I was just thinking that we've been working together for about 16 years now. It's really hard to believe. How are you doing?
Well, I'm great, and we have worked together a long time, and working with you is one of the great joys of working at the Academy with you and our other wonderful colleagues. I'm so glad that everybody's able to join us today. Today is DASER experiment number 4. Cultural Programs of the National Academy of Sciences has been creating these programs for almost 10 years as part of our mission to explore the intersections of art, science, and culture. And this supports the larger mission of the National Academy of Sciences that raises awareness of the importance of science in our daily lives, our culture, and in our decision-making, both on a personal and a policy level. Alana, can you tell us a little bit about what DASERs are?
So DASER stands for DC Art Science Evening Rendezvous, although today here in DC we're meeting in the afternoon. DASER brings together different communities into conversation to foster a general spirit of collaboration and integrative thinking. How can different disciplines inform one another? Can this lead to innovative ideas that could impact both the sciences and the arts? Our DASERs have been here in DC, and they're part of this international network organized by Leonardo, the International Society for the Arts, Sciences, and Technology. This network consists of almost 50 groups that meet around the world, from Montreal to Rio de Janeiro, and from Vienna to Tehran. We hope that our colleagues from around the world are joining us here today. Since we've gone online, we've been calling them DASER experiments to explore the question, how do we take an event that we've done in a physical setting and bring it online? How can we continue to spark some of the similar conversations in a virtual space? You can see our past DASER experiments online on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/CPNAS.
Thanks, Alana. And on the surface, our DASERs are about conversations between art and science. But as Alana just pointed out, they are really about how experts across disciplines learn to collaborate and to talk and to create outcomes that they might not be able to achieve as individuals. For today's DASER, which is entitled The Poetics of Mathematics and the Process of Collaboration, we will hear a conversation between a cellist composer, a dancer choreographer, and a mathematician who became a visual artist. For some of them, they are longtime collaborators, but what is special today is that we were able to record the beginning of a new collaboration between people who have just met online for the first time. I think it is a rare glimpse at how collaborations could begin. They will introduce themselves after Alana gives us some technical and logistical instructions.
Sure. So before we begin, just a few logistics. The first part of today's program has been pre-recorded. While you're watching, our guests are here in the virtual green room, and they can begin taking your questions. As you think of questions, feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to ask questions. And the speakers will then come on after the recording is finished to continue the discussion live. We're also going to use the chat function for what we call community share. And this is part of the most popular aspects of our in-person DASERs. We would allow anyone in the audience to take the microphone, introduce themselves, and share cross-disciplinary projects that they're working on. So today we're going to use the chat function to do that. Please introduce yourself, where you're from, any current projects you're working on. Maybe you're looking for a collaborator. So again, the Q&A button is for questions, and the chat is for community share. And after the event, we'll email a transcript of the chat discussion to attendees. So don't share anything too personal. Let's begin.
Hi everyone, my name is Michael Schulteis. I'm a painter and sculptor in Seattle, Washington. My background is in math and economics and in education, but then I worked for years in front of whiteboards at Microsoft. I worked on Microsoft Excel and some of the large mapping systems. So my experience has been working on chalkboards and whiteboards. And in 2000, I just took that idea and brought it into an art studio that I set up. And instead of using the whiteboard for ideas in engineering and software development, I now work on it as a painting. And then about 10 years ago, I met an amazing cellist. His name is Rieck.
Hi everyone, my name is Rieck. I'm a cellist, composer, educator, currently in Portland, Oregon. And I started playing cello at the age of 5 and started improvising at about the age of 9. And pursued that through college, graduate school. And about 15 years ago, I felt like something was missing. And I came to realize that that was a more creative aspect. Just performing other people's music was not quite scratching the itch that I had. And when I realized that composing and creating from the ground up started to scratch that itch, I've really shifted my focus that direction. I started working with dancers and creating music for dance and realized that the collaborative process of working with other artists who have different products, different ideas was really, really valuable.
I'm a director, choreographer, dancer based in Seattle. I also have a group that is called Hypernova, Contemporary Dance Company. And I have been working actively here since about 2000. A good meat of my career was also performing and choreographing at the Can Cabaret. So I worked on a very intimate stage for years and years. And since then branched off, doing my own separate work as well, being more open to whatever projects fly here and there.
I met Michael first as a cello student, and then we became good friends and went from there. Knowing him, working with him, getting ideas, inspiration, support from him has been one of the most rewarding relationships, both artistically and personally, that I've ever had. And today we're going to share a little bit about those collaborations, our friendship, and just kind of how we share some ideas. So how did we meet, Michael? How did you find me?
Well, I'm a long distance runner, and I was preparing for my ultra marathon, and I almost got hit by a car. And so it was a harrowing experience for any runner. But it was this moment outside of sentiment where I just decided, wow, there are some things in my life that I want to do that I guess now the kids call it a bucket list. But one of the things that I've always wanted to do is bring music into my life, the lifelong process of learning music, and especially the cello. And so I went and rented a cello and started looking at YouTube videos and checked out books from the library. And then a friend of mine said, well, if you're really serious, you respond to the cello and the cello responds to you, you need to do this right. You need to get a good cello teacher. So I went on Craigslist, and there I found Rieck, and we've been fast friends ever since. I can do a quick studio tour here in my Seattle studio. It's a mess, but you can see on this wall over here, it looks like a whiteboard with equations and geometry all over the place. and this is an older painting of a blackboard palette. But instead of working out ideas for software development, I'm working out ideas about geometric models that describe things in my life. And then the sculptures are the 2 dimensions jumping off from the canvas, and then I work in bonsai, and the wires that I bring from my trees, these little geometric forms, jump off in wire form, and then I cover them in wax. And we cast these in bronze, 2 foot up to 8 foot tall bronze sculptures. But just in short, my experience in the art world and my love of geometry in art, for about 3,000 years, artists have been putting geometry in art, but it's always been in the physical realm. And everything's supposed to be conceptual these days in art. So I think we should just include the equations. So people who know this language can read the equations and see it in their own minds. So then we have the conceptual, the 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions. And then I am including the time variable so that we can change the geometry in the internal chalkboard of our minds. And there, it's, you know, the 4th dimension of time, we can really tell interesting stories. But one of the things that fascinates me about my connection with you, Dylan, and our adventure in these collaborations is that, you know, Pythagoras said there's music, there's math in everything. As he walked by the metalsmith shop, and you know, the metalsmiths were pounding on these different lengths of rod of metal, and this then, you know, he was the very first music theorist because he was interested in the ratios and the pitch. So Dylan and I, it's great because there's, you know, math in everything, and of course in music, there are all these extraordinary relationships. I don't know how am I describing this in the right way, Dylan? How do you see it as a musician?
There's a lot to unpack there. I think going back to when you mentioned paying attention to what's going on with our lives, on the surface, if someone doesn't know you and your art, they might look at what looks abstract to them or looks mathematical, and they might overlook the really expressive quality which is in there. And that's something that I think you've really taught to me, is even if you have a concept, and sometimes I develop these concepts based on our conversation. It's not just, oh, this is an idea and this is the representation, which is why it's a means to expressing something. And that's something that I felt you've really inspired me to do. Pythagoras, I think, was a good starting place because the preamble to that was we would hang out for an hour after a cello lesson and just talk. And you would let me know, and then you said, oh, come down to the studio, come see what I'm working on. You showed me some images, you started describing it, and I said, whoa, this guy's a heavy hitter. And so I did just a little kind of cursory research and, you know, had encountered some of his ideas through the origin of music theory in a way of relating frequencies. So, you know, high and low frequencies are just speeds of vibration. If I play my lowest string, that's vibrating at a much lower speed than if I play up here. And Pythagoras, of course, thought that the whole world works on these simple ratios, and that would explain like the hand of God or something in the universe. But early on, I wanted to find a way to convey in an audible sense some of these ratios. So I did it through rhythm. For instance, this note is vibrating at twice the speed of this note. So you could relate those ratios in an audible sense by having the lowest note occurring at a rhythm that's half the speed of the upper note. And so that was kind of just the first little kernel of inspiration that I got from one of our conversations, and then that worked its way into our first collaboration at Quartet.
I think that's a great example, and we wish everyone watching this could be in our studio or in your recording studio, but because we can't do that, what we're trying to do now is to allow everyone into the studio of our minds and to to participate and understand kind of how we think. One of the things that's been fascinating too is that, you know, for me, in my appreciation and love of economics, it's a social science, it's describing how people behave. You know, I also think that there is an extraordinary narrative quality in math and geometry. And so, you know, as an example, I'm going to put on my paint necklace here. As an example of one of the ideas that's a very simple geometric form that we turn to all the time is this idea of, and it comes from Kandinsky, 1917, the concentric circles. So here are some concentric circles, and they're not as painterly as Kandinsky's. He has more color, but just like him, these circles are on the 2 dimensions, and they're you know, they're relegated, they're corralled onto this canvas. But now a lot of people in the art world don't know the math, but here it is, I've drawn it for people, I've painted it for people to see. But when we include this equation of the radius is equal to sine of theta, it's just a circle, but we set I is equal to 1 to infinity. Now all of a sudden, and little kids love this, you know, because I tell them the story about how you're sitting at the pond with one of your parents, and one of your parents tosses in a pebble. And what happens is there are these ringlets that form and these concentric circles. What's interesting, I think, is that we can talk about this radius of these concentric circles. We can go from 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Remember, we're going to infinity. 4, 5, in our mind, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All of a sudden, we're off the canvas, and we're already touching Portland, where you're at, Dylan. And these concentricals are getting larger and larger and larger and larger, and they're touching where you were born, and where I was born, and where everyone who's watching this were born. And who was there when we were born? Well,
Our mother.
Our mothers. And so we are all connected in this geometric model. And so, you know, one of the experiences that I've had with you, Dylan, is that then, okay, we talk about this geometry, and then you start thinking about the composition and how that can work, you know, the music theory, but we still are thinking about our mothers. Internal narrative quality, not only autobiographical, but biographical, that we can tell these extraordinary stories. And that's what we do, both in the geometry and the paintings, and then also in the compositions. And maybe you can speak to some of your compositions with regard to this.
Well, as Michael described that, you know, my brain, of course, goes to music, and just thinking about the idea of a ripple in a pond. Okay, so as it spreads, these ripples are going to be further apart. And also, as the ripples get closer to the edge of the pond, they're going to have less intensity, right? So just looking at that, I think, how would I relate that to music? Well, perhaps you have a repeated gesture that the time is between the repeats is getting greater, but also as it spreads out, becomes more diffuse, maybe it loses some of its volume, or some of its intensity through vibrato, which is something that we've been talking about, is new parameters that we can. So for instance, if I were looking at this, I have an idea of how I might do that, and now I can reflect on maybe my relationship with my mother, or my history, or that spreading out through time, right? So incorporate a little bit of a emotional component. And you know, how might I improvise this? Well, start when the rock hits the middle, and then the ripples start spreading. They're losing energy, they're heading to the edge. but they keep going, you know. And if you can even reflect that in music, where you could have a decrescendo, and then instead of a terminal dynamic, which is, oh, it's only going to pianissimo or something, you could have it go down to niente, which means it keeps going all the way to the infinity of nothingness, you know. So we've known each other for well over 20 years.
Yeah.
We grew up in the same town, Bellingham, Washington, and we're just introduced as friends and kind of had a similar social circle. And I knew you danced at that point, since you've done it your whole life essentially. And I'm sure you knew that I played music, but you know, those aspects were never crossed until, when was The Buffoon? Was that our first actual collaboration?
I think that was our first like larger scale collaboration.
So, you know, for me, Rainbow, those were pretty early when I was kind of getting more into composing. And it really scratched an itch, so to speak, for me, and helped me realize how much I needed to be creating original music, collaborating with outside ideas. And sometimes if I hit a wall, I don't have to rely on my own, 100% of my own ideas, you know,
Right.
the aesthetic of dance or the narrative of Rainbow's dance, or in Michael's case, these conceptual ideas, or just responding to shape, to geometry.
I mean, I feel like our collaborations, it's like a spark kind of ignites of, I love the anticipation of not knowing with the different, work we're doing individually, and then we come together and seeing it at the last moments, how it fits together is always surprising to me in a way. It's like these unexpected things that happen.
Yeah.
And that's why I kind of keep coming back to it. It's almost like addictive in that way.
Mm-hmm. So we were talking about like a textural depth, I think,
Yeah.
you know, having gestures that can be, I use the term diffuse, but in my mind, I'm thinking more background, foreground, and I use register and tempo, right? So you might have a gesture that's happening very slowly simultaneously with a similar gesture that's happening more quickly. So it makes me think of like concentric rings kind of, but.
Yeah, and even arm gestures, for instance, as an example, like how to approach how something, for whatever reason, looking at the work and hearing the sounds, how something is initiated, the quality of how a movement is initiated. Am I tempo-wise or quality-wise, like, am I moving into it, or am I subtly shifting into it? This sort of vibe. Obviously, some things could be approached really on the nose. There's curves in the work. There's always these repetitive circle type shapes. And for me, I found those just on a surface layer first approach interesting to work with, because it's just a starting point to mimic that and feel that in my body. And then it's been becoming more of how can that come alive and like activate? Can these things that have like it's thicker and then it's thinner, can it kind of like stretch and move within these areas? And how does it move in space? Because seeing the work flat, or, you know, even for me, seeing the sculptures, I'm just seeing it on a screen, so it's still flat to me in that way. So how to make that three-dimensional in the movement too. I'm thinking about when he was making that work, did it come this way and then around, and how did it carve through space, and is that space thick? Is there resistance in the air? Or is it thin and gliding through quick, you know?
Yeah. It's so interesting to me, you know, of course everyone thinks that dance and music, it makes so much sense. But in some ways, from your perspective, you have a more direct in to visual art, because dance is about shape.
Yep.
and movement, of course. I think also something that will become evident when you talk to Michael is there is a real sense of movement. You know, obviously a painting is not physically moving, a sculpture is not physically moving, but when he and I have talked, a lot of these shapes talked about those as almost being a pathway or an orbit, you know, as if there's movement passing through that. Michael talks a lot about overlap as kind of it can be a metaphor for relationships, how kind of close you are with a partner or a family member or whatever, and how over time through these cycles, there can be more or less overlap. And as we know, you know, like relationships change over time, especially over long periods of time when there's a lot of cycles. But as you move around the sculpture, if you're looking at it from one side, it might just look completely vertical and you don't really get much insight. But then as you go around it, there might be these loops that from some angles are not overlapped, and then from some angles are overlapped.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So like I've been thinking a lot about the idea of a viewer in 3 dimensions cycling around, but looking at that, you know, looking into the center of the sculpture.
I mean, I think the whole orbiting idea, just in general, has been really interesting to me too. It's always been in my mind. We had talked about maybe this would eventually be 2 dancers so that you could build a relationship in that way. I'll just show a little example. Finding ways to do that even with one body. So something like a movement that has this sort of like feel that, and maybe it's slower and like this sort of like boom, like build to it. Just different examples of like how to get that feel even with one person. Reading about his work too, it's so poetic and lends to dance in that way, where it's not just about, I think, the structure of how he creates it, the mathematics behind it and all that, but there is this story to it. And it has this like longing feel to me, and this shared kind of experience that we're all in, and the unknowns of that, and the beauty and the tragedy of all those things. But I can feel that in the music too.
I think it all comes down to, you know, the reciprocity of empathy and understanding, and seeing ourselves within the other, and then opening up with trust to allow the other to see themselves in us. And what I've just described is this wonderful interior and exterior of allowing the other person into your interior. And I think so much for me about when I watch dance, I just love dance. I just see many different ways that we can look at our fields, respective fields, but also do away with fields. Or divisions, and it's one big field. You know, it's like little kids, you know, they don't stay in one area of the playground. They just go wherever the fun is. And I think where the fun is where our minds take us into the realm of the other. Tell me, Rainbow, what are your thoughts?
I love that just image of playing together. I'm really excited to see what comes of this connection that we'll have without knowing each other first, because usually, you know, I've worked with Dylan or other friends that I've had kind of a built-in relationship even outside of the work itself. So I'm excited to see how this develops, and what kind of how we start it is going to be interesting to me too, because we are coming from a commonality of having Dylan in the middle here. So
It's wonderful. He's our hub.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that. And I think I was just reading a wonderful quote where dancing is the mathematics of the soul. I mean, to be honest with you, I can't wait to learn about how, Rainbow, your experience as a human and as especially a dancer changes the way that I think about geometry. When I go for my long non-smoky runs, I can see the limbs that are, you know, have fallen into the water around Green Lake. And there's a limb then the inverse is reflected. And I think so much about my work in polar coordinate systems is that there's a pole, and then we draw a radius, and then we map out. And that experience of taking a geometry and rotating around, so much of my love of dance, everything from ballet to, modern dance, is about the body of the dancer and the rotation, and then we talk about the gesture that the dancer is holding, and all these things that you know better than any of us, and it all has frequency and tempo, and then we're talking about areas that Dylan is familiar with. Love at the core of collaboration is I want another attic in my mind that I can go play in. I want another area of the playground in this open field where we go beyond the Rumi talks about going beyond the gate, the fence of judgment, and we meet each other out in the open field. And I love that idea of my painting, my geometry, my sculptures, the math in the work and the geometric models that I'm working on will be different. And I can't wait to see how they transcend what I otherwise would have been doing had I not had this amazing experience.
I love the notion, Michael, of getting beyond disciplines. And I think that really resonates because I don't just enjoy spending time with you, Michael, because you're a painter or a sculptor or a mathematician. Those are just aspects. I just enjoy speaking with you. I like your thoughts and insight on a wide range of things. And Rainbow, I've always just really enjoyed your energy and enthusiasm and persistence. And, it just happens that we have these particular fields that we are experts in. But I think at the end of the day, for me, it really comes down to spending time with people who, Michael, as you said, fill up, essentially just are broadening the palette of the mind, right? Michael, before you got here, we were kind of talking about overlap and some of these themes of cycling with another person through life, and how there are moments of overlap that are greater and less over the cycle of life. And Rainbow, since she's been choreographing by herself somewhat, she was playing around with gestures that embodied that just within one person. Rainbow, would you demonstrate for Michael that gesture? I thought it was it really made me think of some of the shapes in some of your paintings.
Yeah, this kind of feels.
It seems like there's multiple axes going on, or multiple loops. And so the first thing I thought of course, was like the arm almost being the interior loop of the lumosum, and the body being the exterior loop. So moving forward, we're not going to be able to create an entire suite of new works in this one session, but a few thoughts I had were, one, Michael, you are so good at assigning meaning to the shapes that you're working within, and how those can be models for relationships or certain narratives within your life. And Rainbow's work has a real narrative quality as well, and it more abstract, but she also deals a lot with relationships. Power dynamics actually come up a lot in Rainbow's work, and that's something that, Michael, I know you've been observing more in life. So that was just something that I felt like in both of your works and conversations individually, that seemed like that might be fertile ground. Even if we, and I'm just throwing the spaghetti sauce on the wall, as you like to say, but even if we just started from, okay, what are a few basic shapes? I feel like dance is kind of, in some ways, more closely related to geometry because it has the shape component, and then there's the time component and movement component over time that relates to music very much.
Totally, totally.
So I think almost starting from maybe a place where, Rainbow's body, and she has an amazingly limber body, as you will all come to find out. It's incredible. Even starting from a place of, okay, what if we start from a particular shape that we've, imbued with certain symbolic meaning, and then kind of build a narrative from there. And both Michael and Rainbow there is a lot of narrative. There's a lot of dynamic, meaning to that work. I feel almost like if we started from, almost like static shapes, but then there was a narrative, and, maybe Rainbow, how those shapes evolve over time, interpretation of the narrative. I could write a piece of music that would be my interpretation of the narrative over time.
Yeah.
Just spitballing.
So what I love about your movement, Rainbow, and my apologies, I was rustling around in the garbage, and I found an old wrapper, and I was looking for this, but I found something even better, one that doesn't have any label on it. And what I'm going to do is try to just illustrate what I saw as, here we go, and there's a reason to the quiet mayhem. So here's your body in its pole, and here's the gesture that you were making from where I sat. And it is what you were making with your arms. But tell me, is this how you, can you see yourself in this?
I can, yeah, I definitely can. And I think a third element to me, as far as how I feel that movement, and I'll just get up to show again, is the this up and down pull here, this, and then this driving force that is initiating that rippling up. So to me, there's also that kind of weight at the bottom. So if I was looking at it and drawing, like, that would be an important thing to me, whatever that bottom.
Like something like that,
yeah.
where you're going down and around, down and around.
Yeah.
And then I don't understand this that you were describing. It's so beautiful. Can you tell me again the other one?
Well, I think anytime I'm moving, I'm thinking of the energy, these points of energy out the top of my head, out through my heels. So there's always, it can bend, but there's always this tension, this string of energy like that. So maintaining that, this circular motion, this is static, right? And then that point of, that like revving point of energy into the floor that's bringing it up and keeping the motor going in that way.
And then you were extending yourself up as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Doing that. So.
And does this resonate for you then?
There's almost like a vertical figure eight there.
Yeah.
Which to me is also just even standing here, I can show it, or kneeling. I always have in the back of my mind is kind of a energetic cue, this figure eight feeling of alignment, like.
Oh yeah, great.
Torso. So it's just kind of cool to see it also drawn out like that.
Yeah.
So.
And then if you were to be orbiting around, then this becomes, it's on both sides. Talk to me, Dylan. What can you make of this?
Oh, I mean, I can make a lot. So from a structural standpoint, I mean, there's a lot of ways to kind of interpret the movement. Ooh, I like that a lot.
So it's a pirouetting.
If I were to layer sort of gestures, there was this into the earth movement that was kind of repeated, that this kind of vertical component that for Rainbow was really important, right? And then she kind of also demonstrated that with the figure going down. So, you know, to me, that would be like a base gesture, like something going into the earth. You know, you could even do like a descending gesture, like a.
Nice. Oh, yes, 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 yes.
That's bouncing off the earth, right? And then we have the whole axis, the vertical axis. Something about the line to me just feels like a plane, you know? So maybe we have a high texture. What would work with that? Something just static that's held here, you know? Boom, 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 boom. And then we have what I'm seeing as kind of an interior loop, something in the arm, which is rotating inside, you know, the body is on a larger plane, and then the inside could be at a different tempo too, right? So. And then of course we were talking a lot about retrograde, Michael. So I incorporated a lot of retrograde early on to give the sense of symmetry to your shapes, you know, and then having an interior inside the exterior. But some of these interior, the smaller shapes that are up higher, that are moving a little faster, you could have a little retrograde there to just show. So could I figure it out? This is an approximation.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, may I ask a quick favor? I have to get one more. It won't be loud. It won't be rustling.
Rustle.
But what it is one of my favorite things from my little bonsai trees outside. I wonder if you can see them. Well, the bonsai wire that I use to train the limbs, I would pull off the limbs after a year, and this is new wire for the limbs, but then I used to take the wires and bring the wire to the studio, and then the geometry from the paintings, what I do is I form the geometric shapes, you know, in this way, and then replicate what's on the painting in 2 dimensions that's in the equations in the conceptual, and then the 3 dimensions here. But as I finished this sculpture, the armature for the sculpture that was influenced by Rainbow's gesture, her very first gestures, I'm just gonna clip this off, and then we could cover it in wax and cast it in bronze, and it'll last, you know, about 3,000 years of Rainbow's gesture. The cool thing is now, so this shape comes from Albert Dürer, 1471, you know, the Limaçon, the polar curve. We think of him as one of the most important Renaissance painters, but he was also a mathematician. And then this shape here comes from 1699, Giovanni Ceva, who was studying the cycloids that Galileo was working on 100 years earlier, 1599. So here's the embodiment of Rainbow's dance gesture, both in, you know, from my vantage, in 2 dimensions, you know, that will go onto a canvas for a painting, and then sculpted in bronze. but I also think then what would be amazing is to combine all of these now. If Dylan, if you could play that, what came to your mind, and Rainbow, you dance what came to your mind, and I'll rotate the sculpture as if it's in the gallery and we're walking around it.
All right, I'm going to start with bouncing off the earth. So this is component.
Yeah, wonderful.
And their audio. Hi, Dylan. Hi, Rainbow. And Michael will, I think, pop up here any moment. Rainbow, I think you're still on mute. So if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself. I see Dylan went to see if he could find Michael. He'll join us. He'll join us in a moment. Thank you so much. I will take just a moment to apologize. I think several of us were experiencing a little bit of a choppiness with the transmission of the video, but it seems like we're in good standing now. And when we do post this later, we'll post it with the original video, which is quite lovely, especially that magnificent collaboration at the end. I think that Michael's being paged. So I'll just go ahead and start with the two of you. I do want to encourage people, first of all, to ask questions via the Q&A function. That's the line of questioning that I'll be monitoring. The chat function I won't be able to see or check while we're moderating this event. Hi, Michael. Well.
Hi.
Good. Glad to have you all three with us today. I'd like to start with a question. A version of this has come in sort of in our pre-questions, but to get us started, it's been a few days since we recorded that introduction where we saw it, which I'm very excited about, and I'm very appreciate the boldness of all three of you to be willing to be in that sort of vulnerable place to begin a conversation. And I wonder, now that a few days have passed, what are your thoughts about that discussion? How did that feel? Have your thoughts sort of evolved since then? And I think our audience will be most curious as to, what are how do you start a collaboration like this? I mean, we just saw this happen live, or it was recorded, but it unfolded for the recording in sort of real time for us as you were having that discussion. I'm wondering what your reflections are, and having watched the video, and your thoughts about collaboration after that.
Well, I thank you, JD, and thank you, Alana, for organizing this. It's a pleasure to connect with everyone on this video chat. It's a cocktail party, and we're living through a pandemic, right? So how to connect with another person, I think, is so much about relationships. And a collaboration is no different than a cocktail party. When you meet someone for the first time, what do? We try to find common things, things we have in common. And, oh, you're a runner too. What type of tennis shoe do you wear? Or, that kind of thing. But in terms of collaboration, how we do it, I think it's very simple. Everyone talks about STEM and then STEAM. And the three step that I would encourage people to consider is how to build your own steam. You know, how to build the steam between two people, so you have this accelerant. And Dylan and I always talk about the bowing is not just a back and forth like this, but it's actually like a locomotive. Yeah, it's this wonderful figure eight, almost infinity. In terms of how to start a collaboration, my experience, whether I've been teaching 6-year-olds or 60-year-olds, physicists or grade school kids, on how to collaborate, is you figure out how to find common areas in your lives. You have to have this trust and empathy, reciprocity and empathy, that you want to learn about the other person. They open up to allow them to learn about you, and then you help each other get to the next level. I've experienced, in my experience, the way to do that is to find areas that are in common, and then figure out what are within that common field, what are your differences from your own vantage, and then build a bridge across that. And it's that bridge that then is extraordinary to walk across and look back to see from where you came, you've transcended who you were, and then you're on your way to a whole new way of being. And so, you know, as an example, one of the exercises that I often use is I list out 20 words, and I'll just give you 5. But when you think about these words in your own field, you can talk about how you relate to them and what they mean to you in your field. But then, as you will see, that these words actually are universal. So the words that I'm going to use for right now are beginning of a painting, beginning of a dance, beginning of a composition, beginning in whatever field you're in, the space, the relationship, whether it's the relationship of a plot line and dynamic in characters, the relationship between geometric forms, the relationship in music. Dynamics are huge in music. Wow, dynamics and relationship between two dancers, it's amazing. So finding words that are common terms help build these fields, the place where the bridge can form from one field to the next. So this is my approach. It's very much like a cocktail party where you're trying to connect and then find out, that's a new way of thinking about it from your vantage, and to be open to helping the other person get to the next level of understanding, and then they will help you as well.
I think that's a great description, Michael. And I think just a baseline of curiosity about other people and other fields, I think is a big part of it, you know, and just hearing about what other people do. And I think maybe a hurdle that some people can have, and I felt like I had and still have, is feeling daunted by, you know, trying to understand a field that maybe seems too technical or difficult to understand. But if you're dealing with someone who's a good teacher, then they can convey some type of kernel of information. So I think finding people who are willing to share and listen and meet you where you are, and you know, like Michael said, find those commonalities, those tendrils that cross between people from seemingly different fields. One thing that I also have found important recently is, rather than trying to always force a concept, and I think early on I was guilty of, you know, being really, okay, now I need to have a concept and this will match one of Michael's ideas, or this will be exactly related to one of Rainbow's movements. I think a little bit of letting go and just letting the subconscious mind sort of stew on things. And most of my ideas come up in the middle of the night. I'll wake up and just have an idea. And I think letting the mind do some of the work and letting there be, rather than trying to force, like, oh, now I have to incorporate this idea and this idea, take those in, let them sit, And then when you create, they'll be a part of you. So that might be a little too airy-fairy for some people who want to have a more concrete description of the process, but I really think there's some value to just expanding the palette of what you know and then letting that just sit.
So Rainbow, it sounds like you have a lot of opinions coming from home. I wonder what your reflections are on the what we just saw in the collaboration in general.
Yeah, well, I think that I think you do have to, it's similar to what they were saying, but you do have to start internally processing it and letting it sink in a little bit, thinking about how, what you can offer to the bigger picture of the collaboration, and to actually genuinely, passionately want to do it and be interested in whoever you're working with and their perspective, what they're seeing, and let there be some breathing room to explore it together and not have, like Dylan was saying, I think it is important to have a little letting go. And I find myself doing that too. I really want to pinpoint some concepts and things like that. And the more I, at least in the early stages, leave it open, because those landmarks and structure will find its way as you go on. But just speaking about it is, with dance at least, creating something, it's like the arc of a piece, and it's not necessarily chronological. And I think the collaborative process is like that as well. And so after viewing that previous conversation, I found it really interesting, because that was not necessarily the path that I was expecting us to go, as how we were going to start shaping some ideas, but it flowed really naturally. And I've been slowing down almost what I've been creating, because afterwards I was emailing some videos of longer movement sections I had been working on and this and that. And I almost wanted to just pause and look at it with fresh eyes again, and kind of think about what could come of this after, because that was the first time I had met Michael, was through that conversation. So it was just, I don't know, it was exciting to look at it again in a new way, I think. Yes.
Great. And before I go to some of the questions that are coming in, Michael, you had sort of mentioned how your thought process has sort of continued since that conversation. Would you like to discuss a little bit about that?
Yes, I'd love to. So, there's this play, such this extraordinary energy. It's the accelerant or the propellant as well. What happens though for me is, when you look at a star, you can't see it if it's really faint, but if you look to the side, then you can see it out of your periphery. So one of the things that I do is I have my moleskin notebook, and no matter what, if there's an idea that comes into my mind, I'll write it down. No matter if it seems, it's that automatism that Cy Twombly taught me. No matter what comes into my mind, it goes out onto the notebook. And what I'm referring to is the space in between, the interstice between our collaboration, our meeting. A lot of times then what happens is I'll have these ideas or these hunches, and I'll just write it down so that I capture it, and then I can continue to ruminate and metabolize it. So one of the examples, like for me in 2004, meeting you, JD, and going to the National Academies and going to the auditorium and seeing this extraordinary cycloid. And then I did my exhibition there in Washington, D.C. On Galileo's work of a cycloid. When I was thinking about Rainbow's extraordinary gesture and movement, but also that bounce. And I love how Dylan, incorporated that. Was that the low C, Dylan? Yeah, I love that. So for me, like thinking, okay, yeah, and Rainbow did that wonderful sort of bounce at the right time. So for me, in my geometry, the polar coordinate system or the Cartesian coordinate system as well, it's always the axis goes off to infinity. But then watching rainbows, it's really more like a chopstick or a paintbrush and a roulette that moves along a straight line. Oftentimes it's a point on the circle that rolls down across this straight line. And it's that curve that is the cycloid that Galileo came up with in 1599. And then it was Giovanni Ceva who extended it. But instead of the axis going off to infinity, really watching that dance from Rainbow, it made me think that, it's actually possible to just think about this definitive line, and then as the point on the circle, it's that roulette that rolls along the straight line. So that's an approximation of a cycloid. What then I realized is it's like Dylan's bow stroke. It's not this back and forth. It's really this infinity sign of movement. And when I was thinking about this late at night, I realized that, it comes from Rainbow's dance. It's really that it goes up and then it comes back down on the other side. So what this makes me realize is that it's not just a geometric form that wraps around an axis, but it's creating that geometry and it goes up and around. So, wow, that's, a new geometry, a new way of thinking about the cycloid is not just wrapping it around like a toroid around an axis, but it just goes up and around. And that's a very two-dimensional experience. And then as an example, the geometry that's on the, and I can write the equation for the cycloid, but then it comes off and it's in sculptural form. So to your question, JD, this is what happens is just the ideas just sort of percolate and spill out. But like a pitcher of water, what I found is that if you can create a place where the water can go, you direct it, it's better than if it just spills all over the place. With Dylan working now with Rainbow in collaboration, we create the spout of what we're going to be working on, but that really allows us to send our energy into the dance that Rainbow had, the composition that Dylan was working on, in the geometry. So here it is as an example. This geometry was inspiring me in 2004 based on the auditorium of the National Academies back in Washington, D.C., that architect was using Galileo's. And here it is now in a painting. It'll be in a sculpture. It was in Dylan's composition, and it all came from Rainbow's Balmorhea. That was so cool.
Good, wonderful. I do want to get to some of the questions. I'm going to kind of try to combine some of these so that we can get as many of them as possible. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, type it into the Q&A and I'll try to gather it out. So there's a question about, do you think it's best to jump into an area that neither of you know anything at all about and then see what falls out from the unknown via your three mutually independent perspectives or facets? And that question actually reminds me of something you said to me, Michael, when I was said, I had sort of noted you had started off as a mathematician at Microsoft, you took up painting, and then you began cello. And you said to me, it's always important for me to be doing something new, to learn, to be a beginner at something. And that has always struck me as very profound, because I think many of us have a fear of not being the expert. That we have a fear of not being, basically to be a beginner. And I wonder if all three of you could address that sort of nature. I guess the question is, do you feel neither of you know anything, is it best to jump into an area that neither of you know anything about? Or is it better to approach it from a different perspective? This also ties into another question that basically said, how do you get, how do you start a collaboration with somebody that you don't know? How do you build trust? I mean, in this case, Michael and Rainbow met each other for the first time during the recording, but there was a hub, Dylan. So there was a sort of a beginning, but an extension of that question might be, how do you establish this type of trust with somebody you just met, a new, fresh collaborator?
So I'm happy to begin, but I would love to hear Dylan and Rainbow's comments as well. I think in terms of collaboration, it's helpful if you can pick your strong suit, but your weak suit or your suit that you're a beginner at. I love being a beginner at something in my life always, and really engage in the lifelong process of learning about it, because that energy of being a beginner then is just, I bring it into the studio, into the paintings and the sculpture. And so I think though, in terms of collaboration, it's great to identify what are the fields that you're really good at, but then what are those common areas, those common terms that you can find a common ground between two different fields. And it's the answer to your question. For me, I think it's both. It's bringing that energy of being a beginner into your strong field, and realizing that, wow, you have this opportunity to take your field to a whole other level. I think that there are great advances to be made within a field, but also a lot of times the best advances come from ideas from one field extrapolated and applied into another field. That's how I see it. Rainbow, how do you see it?
I think that something I've noticed is just being able to let go of the fear, insecurity, pride, all of that, and be able to speak freely with who you're collaborating with, letting go a little bit of the worry of, do I have the correct language, vocabulary that they have, whatever it is. Especially, I've noticed that a lot with me and Dylan. What has helped us get over these maybe little hurdles, humps that we have going on will be, instead of worrying about, does this make sense to you, this term or this or that, is just to find our own common weird language of it. Like this boobity boop over here is this wiggly wiggle, whatever it is. But at least then we've created this connection and we can refer to that landmark as we go. And so that's one way I think that has helped when you're working with different disciplines, and that as well as just what's being discussed is the mutual trust. I think you have to truly be interested in what's going on, and just be in that way, have beginner eyes of, okay, this is something that I may not be familiar with, but there's a reason it's going to heighten my personal work, this work together, whatever it is. And you have to want that and keep, reaching for that. Yeah. Dill?
So there was two really good questions there, right? So should we, if I understood the first question, is it valuable for two people to go into a new field that either of them know nothing about? I think that might be interesting. I think that could be sort of scary, but in terms of building trust, as Michael said, if you bring your expertise and someone else brings their expertise, but you each have mutual humility toward the understanding of, I'm not a dancer, and my formal math training is very limited. I recognize that. I'm humble. I'm willing to lay that out there. I'm not going to propose or pretend that I know more than I do. But I'm interested in learning, right? Michael came to me as a student of music and then has ended up being a great teacher to me. So there's just like we meet in the middle with both humility and confidence in our own fields. And there's just like a nice reciprocity that can come from that. And I think just being humble, as with many human interactions, I think humility is a way to build trust with others. And, you know, as long as both people kind of recognize that, okay, we're trying something new and we're not too worried that, oh, is this going to be perfect? Is it going to be wonderful? We don't know. Who knows? Like, you can't get too bogged down on good or bad, or else you're screwed, right? Like it's hard to get away from that as a creative person, and you know, we all have our egos we bring to it. But as much as you can leave that at the door and just take a leap, I think that if both parties do that, then everybody's a little bit vulnerable together, and I think that can build a connection between collaborators.
So another question that just came in is, does music, math, and movement condense into a deeper holistic seed source?
A deeper holistic what?
A deeper holistic seed source. And I'm not exactly sure how the question was intended, but I think that's an interesting notion. Is well, I'll allow you to have your interpretation of what deeper holistic seed source means. But I'm thinking about, you know, sort of the commonalities, sort of just the human experience. And it kind of dovetails into another question that was asked about these processes being applied to medicine, healthcare, mindfulness. I'm going to let you sort of answer that question and however it speaks to you, but I am very curious about how this would translate, maybe either the nature of collaboration or specifically what you're doing, how it would, especially in our time right now, how does it translate into mindfulness and well-being?
I would love to thank whoever asked that question. It's a great question. I think movement and dynamic and relationships are in all three of our fields, but in every field. And so to explore, really to build on what Rainbow and Dylan said, it makes me think about Picasso's famous quote of, when a painting is finished, it's dead. And when the painting is unfinished, it's alive. And he also said, I mean, he was very complicated, right? But he also said that, you know, the painting is really about trying to get back to being a child. And so we're all trying to be the best in our fields. We're all trying to be renowned or whatever, you know. But when you go to the seed, what does the seed want to do? It wants to grow up. What does the grown-up want to do? It wants to produce seed, you know. And so really to access that idea is to live in that unknown in the middle, let go of the outcome, focus on the process, and just play and love the lifelong exploration and learning. I think that within this, the seed holds all of the knowledge for the adult tree or whatnot. But it's for me in this experience, it's all about the energy and the thrill of not knowing. And you know, you don't go to a movie to know the ending, otherwise you would just read the spoiler. You go to learn about and to feel through the experience. And that's what I would encourage people who want to do collaboration, is to be okay with the unknown and be okay with the unresolved, and to play as a little kid would.
Rainbow, you look like you responded when I was talking about the aspect of the question about mindfulness and well-being, and I imagine with your background in movement that's probably an area that you've encountered.
Oh, yes. um, Especially with studying, practicing yoga forever too. It's I think especially with movement, and I'm sure it can definitely cross over into their disciplines as well, but it's so fleeting and in the moment. We discussed that in our last conversation too. Almost this continual letting go that does need to happen each time you're performing a phrase of movement or something. It's like it's never going to be exactly the same again. And you do have to just embrace and be in that moment. I think just speaking as a dancer who I love just the sensation of being in my body and feeling exactly like you can't step out and think about too far ahead, or you're off in the moment. You need to really be um, aware of every little detail. My pinky, my elbow is here in space, it's here, and it's alive. And like Michael, you're saying, it's with a work, the finished product is never, to me, none of my work has ever been finished. It's always still going. I'm thinking about work from like 2014. I don't know why. It was like something I want to tweak still. And but I love that. And I think artists who have a lifelong career, that is, or maybe not career, but interest in what they're doing, is that's how you keep that momentum and that yearning to keep creating and keep working with other people and draw from this and that, is because you know that feeling and you want to keep finding it again, whether it's within yourself through the movement you're doing. For me, I have to keep on wanting to perform again because I want to have that that grounding feeling of being in the now, that I get from that. I can't go ahead, or I'm rushing, or I can't fall behind, I'm slowing down. It has to be just right there at that moment. And I'm sure similar in music. It's like, yeah, your mind can skip ahead to what's to come, of course, because you have to think about that a little bit. But I just think it's a beautiful thing, and it relates so much to, as you're saying, the human experience. And I think all our work, whether we acknowledge it in writing about our work or whatever, but I can tell that each of us has put that thought of like, what is it to be human? What is this experience? And it's just, I don't know. I've said it before, but I think it's beautiful and tragic in its way to explore that. And that's what I love about what I'm doing personally.
A very sort of literal answer to, is there a common seed? The thing that comes to mind for me, and maybe this is how I think of movement and music and mathematics and geometry, is pattern. I just think, and someone mentioned in the chat something about, we're creatures that recognize pattern, and there's something about iterative patterns over time, and in Michael's paintings, patterns over texture, layered and layered and layered and layered, and levels of diffusion. And then in dance, there's repetition, but your slow change, iterative over repeated patterns. Somehow that was just kind of like a literal seed that seems to me like a real commonplace between all of this types of work.
Well, thank you for those thoughtful answers. And regretfully, I think we've reached the end of our time together. It always feels like we're just getting started on generating some discussion when the big bad director has to come in and say time's up. So I want to thank the three of you one more time for giving us your time, energy, and your boldness to experiment with us with this DASER. I want to thank everybody who joined us today in Zoom land, and you should be able to expect an email within the next few days that will tell us a little bit about um, sort of a questionnaire. There will also be a transcript of the chat, which is just, I have to say thank you to everybody who participated in the chat and sharing your personal information, your thoughts, and your insight. It's actually another wonderful layer to the discussion, and we'll share that transcript out with everybody as well. So Dylan, I'm going to be bold. It looks like you picked up your cello. Are you going to play us out?
Should I play us out?
Yeah, would you? Thank you, everybody.
This is a piece that was improvised originally based on conversations and reviewing notes that I had with Michael.